We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast for Thursday, April 9th, 2026. And today we're going to get into how we're moving on from the Epstein files over at the Department of Justice. ICE has a brand spanking new surveillance tool. Corey Lewandowski ran a pay-for-play scam over at Department of Homeland Security. Medical privacy violations might be going on from the OPM, Office of Personnel Management. So government employees turning over their stuff to the feds. And Planned Parenthood is having a killer year. So let's get after it. All right, guys, I'm going to warn you. We're going to be a little bit unusual today. I'm going to be quite video heavy. And also, we're going to feel kind of good about feeling bad. And then we're going to feel bad about feeling bad. So it'll make sense at the end, I promise. Today's title, Let's Go Epstein. I want to harken back to a meme, a phrase. We all knew it about 5 years ago. Let's go, Brandon. Let's go, Brandon. What did it mean, actually? And what did it symbolize? And I can think of no better example than Mike Rowe, as in the Dirty Jobs guy. He kind of broke it down. I want to give him a play. It's about a 90-second clip of what Let's Go, Brandon actually meant and what it kind of meant to all of us. Mike Rowe.
Point was, this is clever. It's not rude. It's not, as many have suggested, a giant coarsening of the culture. I don't see it as any of those things. Politics aside, this is a reaction to the times that we're living in. And the times that we're living in right now are forcing lots of people on both sides of the aisle to look at a thing or hear a thing and be told that what they're seeing and what they're hearing is not real. And you can't do that to people indefinitely and expect them not to push back somehow. You can't tell people that the border is secure and then show them images of tens of thousands of people flooding over it. You can't tell people that the evacuation of Afghanistan was a success and then show them people falling off of a plane. Right? You just can't do that. And you can't ask people who are watching a NASCAR race at home, who clearly hear the crowd yelling at Joe Biden, to pretend that what they're really hearing is "Let's go, Brandon."
I think that puts it really. Mike Rowe seems like an eminently calm, sober-minded, common sense type of guy. Brandon Brown, for those who don't remember, won an Xfinity NASCAR race. That's like the AAA. He'd never won a race before. He was super excited. They were interviewing him on the racetrack after he'd crossed the finish line, having won his first race. And the reporter panicked because the people who were in attendance in the stands started chanting F Joe Biden, which was getting chanted at the time at lots of different sporting events. It was pretty funny. And she panicked and she said, they're chanting, "Let's go, Brandon." But what did the meme become? It became a nice way of not just cursing at the president, but saying, we know that you're lying to us. And we're just going to shove it back in your face the same way that you're peeing on our leg and telling us that it's raining. And as an aside, Brandon Brown lost his entire career over that. It was no fault of his own. Some podunk, small-time reporter panicked, and then the people ran with the meme around the country, and Brandon Brown couldn't get sponsors because everybody was so scared of offending the sensibilities of the Biden auto pen administration. So he couldn't have sponsors. He tried to lean into it and create his own crypto coin called the Let's Go Brandon coin, and NASCAR wouldn't let him have that. So he never raced again. I think the last time I saw, that guy was selling trailers. I hope he's doing really well. He lost his whole career over it, though, as an aside. But I want to talk about the Let's Go Brandon theme of we know you're lying to us, and the American people are not going to be down with that. We're going to call you out on it. And let's do the retrospective. Let's talk about some of the things that Mike Rowe threw out there and a couple of extras about the Biden AutoPen administration and how they lied to us and our response to it, because it was their circus. They held all the cards. They held the Senate and the House. They had all the power. There wasn't a whole bunch that people who are critical of them could do. And if they did, they kind of got investigated as terrorists. So first one, the border is secure. Don't you know, guys? Aren't you excited? We're totally not letting 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens in. Nope, nope. Be excited. The border is secure. This is the spokesperson for the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, telling us just that.
But does the White House stand by those comments that the border is secure?
What we stand by is that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that that we follow the process that's been put forth. That's why we have historic funding to do just that, to make sure that to make sure that the folks that we encounter at the border be removed.
Man, she is looking down super hard at those notes, right? One of the least qualified press secretaries who we've ever had. And she just doesn't have an answer because she knows at her core that the Biden administration was allowing millions of people to stream across and was unapologetic about it. And they were saying, no, everything's fine. We're going to send Alejandro Mayorkas out there, the Secretary of Homeland Security, to say, we've got a solid wall there, even though we're not building the wall, even though we're selling the pieces that are supposed to be used to build a wall on back page websites for pennies on the dollar. The Biden administration did that in the closing days of their reign of power or reign of terror. They were selling off pieces that were supposed to be used to build a border wall, a border fence, and people could just buy it because it was building materials. So the US government taxed from you to acquire those materials to build that wall, which they're supposed to do. And instead said, no, we're not going to do that. In fact, why don't you buy it at a discount? You don't have to go down to Lowe's. You can get the exact same materials from us, daddy government, far, far cheaper. Now, how about Afghanistan? That was also something that Mike Rowe alluded to. And the timing of it bode well for the vaccine mandate, which we'll also get to. But who remembers that? That happened August, September 2021. For some random reason, Joe Biden got in his head that we have to leave Afghanistan by September 11th so that it can coincide with the 20-year anniversary of the September 11th attacks. For reasons, I guess. No justification for that. It was just an arbitrary point. And the way that we went about doing it, I think most Americans were pretty tired of being in Afghanistan, but at the same time, you have to do it responsibly. We owned a gigantic air base in order to evacuate, and instead we surrendered that and tried to go to a small air base that necessitated a whole bunch of our service personnel running security, and 13 of them got killed. Somebody detonated an S-Fest. Somebody who was known to our government detonated an S-Fest, and 13 service members lost their lives unnecessarily. And that didn't even touch on the optics of Afghanis at their last moments trying to cling to the landing gear of the C-130s as they departed. And we wound up leaving like $80 billion in military hardware back behind. So that fell right into the hands of the Taliban. Everything was awesome. Why don't we actually ask the Secretary of Defense at the time, now it would be the Secretary of War. This is Lloyd Austin sharing his thoughts on the success of the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Have done differently?
Thanks, Elaine. I would just tell you that there hasn't been a single operation that I've ever been involved in where we didn't discover that there's something that we could have done better or more efficiently or more effectively. And I'd also say that no operation is ever perfect. I will tell you that we will do what we always do, and that is to look at ourselves and do after-action reviews, and we want to make sure that we learn every lesson that can be learned from this experience. But I want to take the time to do it the right way. And so we'll do that in the days ahead.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I would just say again, Helene, that I'm enormously proud of our men and women who worked hard to accomplish what they just accomplished, which I think, as I said earlier, is historic and heroic.
So that guy said that losing a baker's dozen of service members, losing their lives unnecessarily, was historic. It was amazing. It was fantastic. Let's go, Brandon, right? We know you're lying to us. And right after that withdrawal, it was so disastrous that it was actually a unifying moment for the country. R's and D's kind of universally panned the Biden administration. They said, that was bad. We don't like that. So, in response to that, the Biden administration said, we got to get back to red versus blue, R versus D. How can we galvanize support? How can we distract? Move off the X. The spotlight is too hot. Oh, I know. We'll lean in really, really hard to this whole coronavirus vaccine thing, the experimental gene juice. We'd had the winter of death and nobody died. And then we weren't getting the numbers anymore. So there was this entire mandate that came down right after the Afghanistan withdrawal, and it polarized the country again. The blue, the D's, they fell into line and make sure you injected it. They'd had enough time elapsed since the mean orange, literally Hitler part 1 had been in there when they said, oh, I'm not getting that because it came out under the Trump administration, to say, okay, I trust the government. They tell me things like it's safe and effective. This is the president, Joe Biden, the human Roomba at the time, saying just that.
And scientific abuse. But if there's one message that needs to cut through all this, the vaccines are safe. I promise you, they are safe and effective. Listen to Dr. Fauci. Listen to the scientists who developed them through extensive and rigorous review. I did, and I took my shot publicly to demonstrate to the American people it's safe and effective.
Listen to Dr. Fauci is up there with Let's Go Brandon, right? Let's go on now to the greatest threat. I mean, we had overcome this worldwide global pandemic. I mean, can you think of something worse than that? We lost so many people. I mean, the bodies were stacked up high, except I went outside and didn't see the bodies that were stacked up high. So I got my questions about that. But we learned under the Biden administration, the Let's Go Brandon auto pen administration, that there was a new or an old threat that had reemerged. And that was white supremacy, which they touted as often as they could. President Biden at some sort of graduation.
Racism has long torn us apart. It's a battle that's never really over. But on the best days, enough of us have the guts and the hearts to stand up for the best in us. To choose love over hate, unity over disunion, progress over retreat. To stand up against the poison of white supremacy, as I did in my inaugural address, to single out as the most dangerous terrorist threat to our homeland is white supremacy.
The most dangerous threat to the homeland, white supremacy. No, it's not. Just statistically not. How many attacks have we seen? And that's actually using the statistics where they pulled the violence from within prisons, where there are white supremacist organizations that function in the prison systems, and they carry out violent actions against other prisoners in the prison systems. Those get counted to actually boost the white supremacy stats, and it's still not the threat. But good enough, right? The Biden DOJ, the Biden FBI, they really focused in on racially motivated violent extremism and expanded that out to whoever they needed to say that, oh, that could be white supremacy too. Do you like to go to the Latin Mass? Are you a Catholic? Are you pro-life, pro-traditional marriage, pro-border sovereignty, pro-Second Amendment? Well, then you are primed to become a racially motivated violent extremist. So we should infiltrate Catholic parishes in the state of Virginia and all around the country, actually, in order to recruit sources so that we can develop terrorism cases on those white supremacist Catholics. That was just one example. It was also linked to this other other category because we had to marry racially motivated violent extremism, i.e., white supremacy, because that's really what they focused in on during the Biden administration, with another group we tried to characterize as white supremacists, but we couldn't really totally do it, but we'll imply it strongly enough. And that is the anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremist, which is government speak in code for MAGA. And they were also the greatest threat to the republic, according to President Biden during his red speech.
Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans.
That is one of the most dangerous, terrifying scenes I've seen in politics in my adult life. The President of the United States with Marine guards standing behind him, with the red lights in the backdrop. Joe Biden went out there and demanded, he told his staff where they were trying to handle him that he was going to do the speech. I guess he had enough lucidity to make that decision, and he did it before the midterm elections. He wanted to galvanize the base, and it worked. It worked. It was effective. But for what we're talking about today, really? The greatest threats, white supremacists and people who voted for the Republican nominee, the thrice Republican nominee, thrice nominated, they're the danger to the country. Let's go, Brandon. Well, we have to assign our robust $11 billion law enforcement, preeminent agency, the FBI, to investigate those white supremacists and the Catholics and the MAGA folks, but they couldn't focus in on those who were burning down crisis pregnancy centers. So there were questions. Why aren't you addressing this? There's been documented evidence and examples and anecdotes of crisis pregnancy centers and houses of worship being burned and vandalized and exploded. And the question emerged numerous times, and most prominently was in front of a Senate Judiciary hearing where the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, was asked that very question. What are we doing on that one? It seems like kind of an issue that the DOJ and the FBI should take up, but we found out that they couldn't because it's dark.
In 2022 and for the first couple of months of 2023, DOJ has announced charges against 34 individuals for blocking access to or vandalizing abortion clinics. And there have been over 81 reported attacks on pregnancy centers, 130 attacks on Catholic churches since the leak of the Dobbs decision, and only 2 individuals have been charged. So how do you explain this disparity by reference to anything other than politicization of what's happening there?
Those who are attacking the pregnancy resources centers, which is a horrid thing to do, are doing this at night in the dark.
So I guess they don't have the ability to investigate it. $11 billion, nobody bought a flashlight. Let's go, Brandon. Of course it was politically motivated. Over 90% of the FACE Act violations were against pro-life individuals. It was people like concentration camp survivor Eva Edel praying outside an abortion clinic, or Mark Houck outside of Philadelphia with his son who gets accosted and then pushes the guy away from him, and he gets charged with a FACE Act violation. It was extremely politicized and weaponized against one side, not the other. If you say anything else, the only response that I could have at that point, because they held all the cards, they held all the power. Let's go, Brandon. I got a couple more. We were assured by our commander-in-chief, the human Roomba, that his son was not just the smartest and most ethical and most competent business person. He totally 100% was not going around the planet grabbing bags of cash for the Biden family. He also, he had his demons. He had endured some drug problems, and that got him kind of in the hot water. And there was this criminal trial where Hunter Biden was not just convicted, he was sentenced to, oh, wait, no, that didn't happen because Joe Biden went back on a promise, right? He told us he would adhere to what the court decided, and then he changed his mind. Joe Biden.
With regard to the question regarding the family, I'm extremely proud of my son Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Yeah, he totally went and pardoned Hunter Biden, among other members of his family, because it's a swamp. He's a corrupt politician. Now, was he actually aware that he was pardoning Hunter? So for the last thing, he's the human Roomba. They applied an auto pen for most of the signatures that they needed during the Biden administration because he was completely incompetent, out to lunch, a senile, befuddled old fool. But we were told that he was riding a unicycle and juggling knives behind closed doors, right? Nobody could keep up with him. He's just so darn energetic. And you really had to be prepared when you went in to brief the president because he was asking these questions that were deep and penetrating. He was interrogating you. This guy was a genius. You know, he finished like at the bottom of his class when he graduated from college and law school. He didn't get any academic scholarship. He's a liar about all that stuff. Wasn't really an intellectual titan, even when he had all of his senses around him, even when he wasn't in the throes of senility and dementia. And that was all laid to bear for us. So this version of Biden is the best version, not so much. And we all saw it on national TV, and it wind up ending Brandon's effort for re-election. Donald Trump and Joe Biden in a debate for the final time in 2024.
What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat.
Oh, absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal. It cost him his chance for re-election, and they had rested him for like a week or two ahead of time. His eyes were as big as saucers because they were so dilated from the drugs kicking in. And later on, they were arguing about their golf handicaps. I mean, it was a catastrophe. And all Donald Trump did was just sit back and then look over like, what did you just say? And kind of evoked the entire American population who happened to be watching it at the time. Let's go, Brandon. All of it. We know you're lying to us about all of these things, and it's really the only way that we can express it. I know all those things probably made your blood pressure rise, but you kind of felt good because you know you were right. You were proven right at the end. And I told you, you're going to feel kind of good about feeling bad. And then we're going to have to feel bad about feeling bad. And we'll get to that in a moment. But guys, this is your time right now, your one-time reminder here on the American Radicals podcast. If you happen to be watching us on Rumble and YouTube, make sure you give us a like and a share and a follow, subscribe, all of those things. You can leave a comment. And also head on over to Spotify, AmRad Pod. We are officially monetized, so I'm going to try to run some ads, which I will do right now. We'll see if that actually works on the back end. I don't know. I've never tried it before. It'll be fun to try it. Okay. Now let's feel kind of bad about feeling bad, because let's go, Brandon. the term works. I think we need to be equal opportunity critics. This is not your mama's show. This is your daddy's show. So let's go, Brandon. What's going to be the equivalent for we know that you're lying to us because you're the Epstein administration? Epstein administration. I'm going with that. Don't believe me? Let's cue it up. President of the United States, he's tired of talking about Epstein.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. It just seems like a desecration.
It's a desecration to talk about Jeffrey Epstein, credibly accused child trafficker. He's gone. He's dead and buried. We don't need to talk about it anymore. We need to move on. This was right around when the DOJ made the decision to close the case. So for the first thing I want to talk about today is the new acting attorney general has weighed in on Epstein, and that's Todd Blanche, who was a member of Donald Trump's defense team in the Manhattan case, and he was elevated to deputy attorney general under Pam Bondi, now the acting attorney general. We'll see who gets the reins there full time. Headline: Acting AG Todd Blanche wants to move on from the Epstein files. Now, who remembers the background for this? Because it started with Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi said, the files are on my desk. I'm getting ready to turn them over. And this was on the back end of a year of a campaign where principals within the Donald Trump campaign and then people within the government were saying, we're going to give you the list, fully transparent. Now, look, knowing the details, the intimate details of that case, will that change most of our lives? No. But it's what it represents. Are there two systems of justice? Are there for the rest of us and then everybody else who is in the elite category? Do they get treated with kid gloves, Hunter Biden style? That's the ultimate question. And for the better part of a year, the Trump administration punted on it, effectively telling us, yes, there's a two-tiered system of justice. Pam Bondi said the files are on my desk. And then she did the Bindergate thing and embarrassed a whole bunch of influencers. And then she said, oh, a mole from within the Department of Justice told me that those files are really in the Southern District of New York, United States Attorney's Office, to which I respond, Madam Attorney General, former Attorney General, a mole? You mean one of your employees? So you've now admitted that you don't have control of the Department of Justice? That doesn't bode very well. And then we had to filibuster and last as long as we could. And over the July 4th weekend of 2025, we learned via Axios that the DOJ and the FBI shut down the Epstein case. No client list. We're not doing anything more with it. We're done here. But they kind of screwed up because they lost the excuse to say ongoing investigation. And that's when Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna and others within Congress started to pressure the Department of Justice and say, give us the files. It culminates with the Epstein Transparency Act, which Pam Bondi refused to comply with for more than a month. And eventually we get a 3 million page document dump without any organization. And it's still not everything. So we're not done with Epstein, and we can't be done with Epstein. We need a definitive answer. Do we have a two-tiered system of justice? According to Todd Blanche, he wants to continue punting. So this was from Headline USA, but they're reporting on an interview that Blanche did with Fox News on the Jesse Waters program. Blanche said that, quote, to the extent that the Epstein files was a part of the past year of this Justice Department, it should not be a part of anything going forward. This is the Epstein administration. It's the millstone around their neck. We can't let them off the hook with it. We need a definitive answer to that question. Another element of the incoming Trump administration, the Epstein administration, was the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. We saw the richest man on earth, the richest human who has ever walked the earth, get brought in a special government employee capacity to bring a chainsaw to government. A majority of people voted for Donald Trump, and that was part of the promise, part of the mandate. We want to just slash government, not with the scalpel, but with the chainsaw. Did they fall through on it? Where does the DOGE sit right now? Well, this is a couple months old, but it comes from Reuters. Headline: Exclusive. Doge doesn't exist with 8 months left on its charter. Quote, that doesn't exist, Office of Personnel Management Director Scott Cooper told Reuters earlier this month when asked about Doge's status. Doge claimed to have slashed tens of billions of dollars, but they can't really audit that. And really what we found out was the dollars were just sent back to the agency. So instead of being wasted on one thing, they could waste it on another thing. Currently, the president often talks about Doge in the past tense. The acting Doge administrator was moved over to Health and Human Services, so she has a dual role. Her name is Amy Gleason, and she basically only talks about HHS at this point. Other Doge staffers have been moved to different spots within the federal government, and a government-wide hiring freeze is now lifted. So we're no longer freezing it. We're not doing layoffs anymore. The Doge is effectively a dead letter. The scalpel, not a thing anymore. Now let's move over to personnel agency. Mention the OPM. It's Cooper. Cooper was that guy, right? What was his name? It was, I lost it. Dang it. Yes, Scott Cooper. Scott Cooper. Office of Personnel Management. Think of that like the Human Resources Department for the federal government. I mean, they got a pretty big task. And I saw this came out a couple days ago, because there's going to be some privacy matters that are shirked and completely disregarded for federal government workers who still do work on behalf of the American people. And that doesn't make them your slaves, it makes them your employees, and there are certain rights attached to that. So this is a report from CBS News. Trump administration personnel agency is asking for federal workers' medical records. And I actually got the regulation right here. The background for this. The claim is that they're going to get information about health insurance to try to bring down costs. But the regulation requires 65 insurance companies that cover more than 8 million Americans, including federal workers, retired members of Congress, mail carriers, and their families, to provide monthly reports to the Office of Personnel Management with identifiable health data on their members. It does not instruct the insurers to redact identifying information, and it says that the insurers are legally allowed to disclose, quote, protected health information. So your medical privacy will now be in the possession of the Office of Personnel Management if you happen to work for the government without any sort of redactions. I mean, if ultimately they're interested in gathering data to find out we're covering this, we don't need to, or we need to cover something else, or maybe we're spending too much in one area and we can move it on to another, or we can actually reduce costs. They don't need to know which person that is. That can be easily redacted, but they're saying that's too cumbersome now. That's going to take too long. We need that information immediately. You don't have any medical privacy if you work for the federal government. Well, you're supposed to. You do have HIPAA in place if you're a federal employee. And there's also this thing about information security, InfoSec. OPM got hacked 2015 by the Chinese. My information was stolen by the Chinese government. You know what the government did at that point? They said, we're bad. Our bad. Here's LifeLock for a year. But all of my information in my standard form 86 that I filled out, which is hundreds of pages long, it's about my entire background, essentially every job I ever had, every place I ever lived, references, personal information, all in the hands of the Chinese government for them to pick and choose who they want to try to blackmail or recruit as an intelligence asset. So I don't think that that's secure with Office of Personnel Management. It'll now have your health records in there if you're working for the federal government, making you vulnerable again to some sort of blackmail scheme. I mean, do you want anybody to know what procedure you had done? Now, let's move on to the next one. And this one is close to my heart, and we've covered it before, but I want to bring it in as long as we're talking about the Epstein administration. And we know you're lying to us. We know you're betraying the promises that you made. And this is about FISA 702, which is up for renewal, guys, in less than 2 weeks. Headline, Trump makes public call for clean 18-month FISA 702 extension. This is the quote that we got from the president on his social media. Quote, with the ongoing successful military activities against the terrorist Iranian regime, it is more important than ever that we remain vigilant, protect our homeland, troops and diplomats stationed abroad, and maintain our ability to quickly stop bad actors seeking to cause harm to our people and our country. So he wants a clean renewal of Section 702 FISA, which is a tool that's supposed to allow our government to look at and surveil the electronic communications of non-Americans, foreigners in a foreign land when they're working on behalf of a foreign government. But in essence, what they do use it for is to spy on Americans. And you can try to justify it with the kinetic operation, definitely not a war. How dare you call me a stewardess? I'm a flight progress coordinator going on in Iran, which is what the president is doing right now in the Epstein administration. And another element to it is the ability of the federal government to buy your data. All of that is included in FISA 702. And yet the Epstein administration wants a clean renewal when a couple of years ago they were arguing, when they were out of power, we need to do away with it. We need to kill FISA. It's a complete 180, a complete betrayal of the promises that were made. And on the subject of spying, do you guys know about this one? This is a report from NPR, which is not a fan of the current administration because the Epstein administration is led by a man who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. But they do have a point here, even if it's for their political reasons. They have an intersecting interest with us here on the AMRAD pod. Headline: ICE acknowledges it is using a powerful spyware. So ICE's Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, they're using various tools as part of their mission to disrupt and dismantle foreign terrorist organizations, particularly for fentanyl purposes. This spyware is called Graphite, and it's created by an Israeli company called Paragon Solutions. Graphite uses what is known as, quote, zero-click technology so that it can gain access to encrypted messages on a device, even if the user never clicks on it. So they send something to your phone, you recognize it as probably some sort of spam or it's a virus, and you're like, I'm not clicking on that. As long as it hits your phone, they can get into your encrypted apps. Now, if it's ICE, if it's Homeland Security Investigations, they could be going after an illegal alien. They could be going after a terrorist. And now we're saying drug dealers are terrorists, which is, again, problematic, but it's within the mission set. But what we covered on a couple episodes ago, the one big, beautiful bill. The one big, beautiful bill that gave $190 billion to the Department of Homeland Security. And they 7x'd the budget for ICE. And they 4x'd the budget for Customs and Border Protection. And there was no limitations or audit on how they were supposed to spend that money. Now, it's all good now because the Epstein administration is in place. And they're going after, apparently, foreign terrorist organizations. Or maybe they're trying to track down an illegal alien or two every now and then. But what happens when the Epstein administration is no longer in power and those agencies have that enhanced funding that is now outside of the funding for the Department of Homeland Security, and they become a private army for President American Psycho Gavin Newsom? How is he going to use those agencies? How is he going to use those funds? How is he going to use those tools? Is he going to use it against people who he deems to be problematic, the greatest threat? Because now we have a precedent. President American Psycho is going to be able to spy on you because he says that, you go to the Latin Mass. You're pro-life. I got a problem with that. You're an enemy of the country. I think I'll spy on your signal chats. Now, let's go over to something else from the Department of Homeland Security, where they're not spying or using some crazy spyware to go after American citizens. They're just bilking you as a taxpayer. So this is an exclusive report from NBC News. Headline: some DHS contractors told White House officials they were asked to pay Corey Lewandowski. So Lewandowski, as a special government employee, essentially ran a pay-for-play scam within the Department of Homeland Security. Now, the individual that they went to for this exclusive report, and got to pull it up front, Lewandowski is refuting this, but if you were running a pay-for-play scam, would you really admit it to NBC News? So we'll have to take it for what it's worth. George Zoli is this guy's name. He's the founder of the GEO group, private prisons. And he had all these government contracts, and he was looking at getting a whole bunch of money from the Department of Homeland Security when the Trump administration was coming in, before it became the Epstein administration. And he said, hey, look, I would like you to use my prisons when you apprehend illegal aliens. Can you pay me some of that sweet, sweet government cash? Well, he went to Corey Lewandowski, and Lewandowski and him kind of had a little bit of a dust up. So Lewandowski said that he wanted to be paid in exchange for allowing GEO, which is run by George Zoley, to get these deals. And Zoley is like, no, I'm not going to pay a bribe, not pay for play. And that was during the transition time. Then Corey Lewandowski, he had political connections before, but then as a special government employee, essentially the chief of staff or the Secretary of Homeland Security, well, now he's a gatekeeper. So Zoley met with him again, and he offered to put Lewandowski on some sort of a retainer. And Lewandowski said, no. I need a success fee. So every contract you get, I'm getting a piece of that. And again, Zoley said, no, I'm not giving you that. And that's when GEO stopped getting any sort of contracts from the Department of Homeland Security. Now, there were other things in there that the White House learned that there were over a dozen complaints from these contractors about Lewandowski trying to run a shakedown on them. And that says nothing about the policy that Kristi Noem brought in, where she said, I'm going to review every sort of expenditure that is brought in, every bill that we get for over $100,000, which sounds like she's trying to be sort of a good steward of the taxpayer money, fiscally conservative, but she just delegated it to Corey Lewandowski. So he had the access to those contracts and could say, hey, I could push this across, but I might need a success fee. And it looks like he might have also been involved in the gigantic laundering operation that Kristi Noem was running, where she took almost $250 million and sent it to her friends so that they could film her in commercials and hype her image so she could run for president. Corey Lewandowski was likely involved in that as well, and the investigation for that is underway. Now, for the Epstein administration's position on life, the most pro-life president ever, Donald Trump went to the March for Life, right? He's out there hyping the IVF. He's stealing money, taxing money from Americans to give it to others so they could put $1,000 into college funds that he's now setting up, calling them Trump funds. And meanwhile, kind of hyping up the stock market, his buddies there at the same time. No corruption there at all. Where does he stand on life? Where is the Epstein administration on this? This comes from Live Action. Headline, Planned Parenthood's killer year, record-breaking abortions and taxpayer funds. So despite the pre-planned closure of multiple actual brick and mortar locations, Planned Parenthood performed a record number of abortions last year, over 430,000 from the prior year. It's an 8% increase. They also brought in $832 million of taxpayer funds. Over $750 million went to Planned Parenthood for money that was stolen, taxed from you. Did you vote for that? Did you hope that the Epstein administration might crack down on that, might just say, you know what? If abortions are so damn popular, murdering babies is just polling so high amongst the populace, they could probably reach into their own pocket for that. Now, there's also other elements where Trump has talked to the Republicans behind closed doors and said they need to soften on the Hyde Amendment, which is, again, using government funds to fund baby murder. One more topic, and I want to use this to play into what we're talking about today with the Epstein administration, but also a chance to hype my buddy's new professional endeavor. My buddy Steve Baker, Joe Hanneman, they're now unshackled from their prior digs over at The Blaze, and they started their own thing, which is called Veritas Regnant, which means truth reigns, if my Latin is correct. They got two pieces that I want to plug, and I'll put them in the show notes. But again, on the Epstein administration, where are our answers on the J6 pipe bomber? Headline, former suspect in January 6th pipe bombs case failed a polygraph. November 6th, new court filing finds. I know my good friend, the Simon in the Simon Garfunkel relationship that we have, Kyle Seraphin, has covered down on this quite extensively, but I do want to throw it out there. Shawnee Kirkhoff, former Capitol Police officer, was a person of interest for the FBI. Her gait matched the analysis that went on that Joe Hanneman, Steve Baker performed. She's likely the perpetrator there. And she was brought in to do a polygraph while she was working in force protection at the CIA, where you need to have a security clearance. She failed the polygraph. She lied or registered deception. They asked her, did you plant the pipe bombs? And I imagine she said no and registered deception. And after failing that, she went back to work for the CIA, having failed a polygraph. At the same time, the FBI looked at her and then said, you know what? We're just going to find our patsy instead and arrest Brian Cole Jr., the autistic My Little Pony fan, who has never changed his habit of life and allegedly used his own credit card, cell phone, and car on January 5th that evening to drop these non-viable devices and doesn't physically resemble the gate at all. And don't believe me, there's another piece that I got over from Project or Veritas, not Project Veritas, Veritas Regnant. And this is the gate comparison between Shawnee Kirkhoff and the pipe bomber, which Joe and Steve presented here. Here's the video. We'll see maybe if it looks a little bit like these sides are going together and there's a match. And what you can see is, despite the FBI's efforts to pull out the video, Joe and Steve slowed it down and showed how, yes, in fact, Shawnee Kirkhoff has a pronounced limp that is a result of a soccer injury that she sustained about a decade ago and would comport quite nicely with the gait analysis that they did, and shows how this CIA force protection officer, former Capitol Police officer, is likely the culprit. And yet Brian Cole remains rotting in a prison cell because he's convenient, because the narrative had to keep, because Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi, Janine Pirro, they all really want to go out there and impress Dad, President Trump, and the Epstein administration and say, we got our man. And now they're happy to just continue running cover with an innocent person having lost his freedom. An innocent person who's a vulnerable person who needs extra care. These are the sorts of things that are going on. And this is why Let's Go Brandon and the Epstein administration are an appropriate comparison. We know that you're lying to us. We know it's one big club and we ain't in it. But that's not going to stop us from saying, we know you're lying. It's not what you promised us. And we're going to call it. And we know it gets under your skin. Even though you have all the power, we can still say the thing that you hate. Let's go, Brandon. Epstein administration. All right. So we are done for today on the American Radicals podcast, but I do have a palate cleanse unrelated to anything that we've covered down on today. Just, I'm kind of in that sentimental mood. I'm thinking of my good friend, former co-host here on the AMRAD pod, Garrett O'Boyle. He hails from Wisconsin, and I can think of no better representative from that region of our country than Charlie Behrens, and he has a Midwest love story to tell us here on today's Palate Cleanse.
I'm Midwest cheap. It's a hereditary disease. That's where I got it from. I got it from my grandpa Bob. Meanwhile, my grandma Sue is Midwest rich. She didn't have any money either, but her credit card don't know it yet. That's what kept the fire alive in their marriage for 60 years. Grandma Sue, she would say something like, Bob, the dishwasher smells like burning rubber. And then my grandpa Bob would say something like, then stop smelling things. There was a moment, though, toward the end of my grandpa Bob's life where he got really serious with my grandma Sue. He said, Sue, I know you want to fix all these appliances, but you're just going to have to wait till after I die, because spending the money would kill me dead. And then my grandpa Bob passed away. And look, everybody's got their own way of mourning. Some people turn to therapy. Some people turn to the bottle. My grandma Sue, she turned to the good book, the Lowe's home catalog. The very next day, Grandma Sue replaced every single appliance in that kitchen like she just won the Price is Right Showcase Showdown.
All right, guys. Thanks again for joining us here on the AMRAD pod. We'll be back with you tomorrow, noontime Eastern, here on Rumble and YouTube. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AMRAD Pod.